Second of all, we have to have a zeal to help others. And this is where I struggle sometimes. My sister and I, the people person gene in our family got used up in my brother pretty quickly. And my sister and I were driving around one day, and I said, you know, do you think you have to be a people person to be a Christian? She said, I kind of think you do. And we were both very disappointed about that. Because that's some people that comes very easily. It doesn't come easily for me. But the fact of the matter is, if we want to preach the gospel, if we want to teach the gospel, if we want to spread the gospel, it has to be motivated out of this. A concern to help other people. Paul's vision over in Acts chapter 16. You remember this we slide over this a little bit. If you remember, he's been trying to go to these different parts of the world in Asia, and Christ has forbidden him to do it. And one night he sees a vision from a man who stands before him and says, come over into Macedonia and help us. There's an implication there. Why am I going to preach the gospel in Macedonia? Well, because there's a bunch of heathen over there and I need to convert them. Because they haven't heard the message yet, and my job is to go preach the word to every creature. No. Because I see people there who need help. I see people there that my message and my teaching are going to be useful for them. Go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. This is a discussion that Paul has with the Corinthian church over and over and over, trying to convince them of his motivation, trying to convince them that he is trying to help them and all the things that he has done. Notice what he says, down in verse 12 through 19. It says, the signs of a true apostle were performed among you with utmost patience, with signs and wonders and mighty works. For in what were you less favored than the rest of the church, except that I myself did not burden you? Forgive me this wrong. Here for the third time ready to come to you, and I will not be a burden, for I seek not what is yours, but you. For children are not obligated to save up for your parents, but parents for their children. I will most gladly spend and be spent for your souls. If I love you more, am I to be loved less? Now, we'll go stop there. All the things that he was doing with the church of Corinth were motivated out of a concern for them. And the problem was that they either didn't see that, or didn't notice it, or didn't care. And they were gravitating to all these other people that didn't have that interest at all. Why do you think it's so easy for people to discount the gospel today? You know, Philippians 1, when Paul talks about he's grateful that the gospel is being preached, even though as he acknowledges that some are doing it for the wrong reasons. Some are doing it for gain. Some are doing it out of pettiness and vindictiveness. They see Paul preaching the gospel and they don't want him to be in charge, and so they're going to go preach. And he says, nevertheless, the gospel is preached, and in that I will glorify. But by the same token, I don't think that Paul's point there is that it doesn't matter why you're preaching the gospel. I don't think he's saying that, as long as I've got people out there spreading the word, it doesn't matter why they're doing it. Their motivation is completely irrelevant, because we know that's not true. And we see example after example in the world where evangelists have gone out, and it becomes very clear at one point why they are doing it, and it's not because they love people. It's not because they're trying to help people. It's because they want to make money. I will never forget this. I was in the Philippines, and we were doing a question and answers, which is a scary thing anyway. If you're in a foreign country, now I'm going to ask questions. I have no idea what to expect. And one of the young men stands up and says, I would like to be a gospel preacher. How do I go about getting someone to pay me to do that? And the idea, I don't know what his heart, I don't know his motivation. But I know enough of a track record about what happens in some of those areas to know that probably the motivation of this person preaching the gospel had absolutely nothing to do with a desire to serve God. It had everything to do with a way to make money. Do you think that's going to be effective? If somebody knows that if somebody is selling you a product, and I hate to compare the gospel to selling a product, but this is an apt comparison. If somebody is out there trying to sell you on a car, and you know that the reason they're doing it is because they're getting an extra $500 if they sell you this model, do you think that am I going to be compelled by his message when he says this is the best car out there? Well, you mean it's the one that's going to give you the most money on the back end. Our motivation has to be about helping, about seeking the good of others. And this is the thing that Jesus goes on over and over again in the gospel. You know, this is a message that gets overlooked. If you, and we're not going to go over the read there because I know that you're all familiar with the parable of the prodigal son. But in Luke 15, I sometimes wonder whether the prodigal son is really about what we think. Clearly, we spend most of our time talking about the first part. And it's a beautiful story of the young man who takes his inheritance, squanders it, and comes back to God and repents, realizing what he's done. And the father is waiting for him to come back and embraces him, and he can't even get his confession out of his mouth before he's got shoes on his feet and a ring on his finger and killing the fatted calf and doing all those things. But it's in the midway point of this parable that I'm not so sure that Jesus is really trying to make the point. Because then he looks at the other brother and what his reaction was to all this. You know, there's no indication that the brother cared one bit whether his brother had left or what was going on with him, what had happened. And now that he's back, all that he's thinking about is how it's going to cost me. What's going to happen to my inheritance? How is this going to impact me? And by the way, you never killed a fatted calf for me. You never did those things for me. You never cared about me. I've been doing all these things all this time. Do we find ourselves thinking like that sometimes? You know, how important is it for me to seek the lost? How important is it for me to find that one person and bring them in to join the 99? It's easy to overlook that, and it's easy to content ourselves with the things that we're doing here and to simply kind of recycle. You know, our growth can be recycled from, you know, if we can just get people to, if the preacher does a good job and maybe we can put better signage that people will see us and they'll start coming to us instead of other places. But that's not really growth. Our motivation needs to be, at least in part, a zeal to help others. And this reflects ourselves in the way that we preach the gospel, in the way that we teach to people. What is our concern? And how does it come across when we talk to people about God? Are we trying because we care about them? Are we wanting to win an argument? You know, that's all we see on Facebook now. You know, social media has basically just become a big rock fight. You know, we don't care anymore about persuading anybody. What we care about is getting in somebody's face, you know, refuting their argument, and then posting it out to all our friends so our friends can say, yeah, you showed him. The second that we start to see the gospel as a debate, we've missed the point. Because now we're starting to look at that person out in the world who is lost, and we're not seeing them as a soul to be saved. We're seeing them as an obstacle to overcome. I'm seeing them as a part of the enemy that I am fighting instead of a hostage to be rescued. We have to remember that. We have to have a zeal to help others.